Tourism, Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Research, and he is also the Associate Editor of Journal of Hospitality Marketing and Management for Annals of Tourism Research. The title of Prof. Robin's workshop is Theorisation and Methodology. Let's welcome Prof. Robin.
After listening to two excellent presentations this morning and lunch, I thought the room would be half empty. But I'm glad you're all here. Thank you for listening to me. First of all, thank you, Professor Mustafa, for inviting me. Thank you, Dr. Shantini, Dr. Rupam, for the logistical arrangement, and obviously the organizing committee for doing a great work. I'm really humbled and privileged to be here. And the topic that I'm going to talk about today is something that's relevant to all researchers, irrespective of the stage you are in your career. PhD student, early career researchers, or even established researchers. Okay, very often we struggle with theoretical contribution. Now, for your PhD, something that I'm going to talk about, one of the requirements for your PhD is that your research needs to make a strong theoretical contribution to knowledge. Even when you're talking about submitting papers to good journals, one of the requirements, or the only requirement, is your paper should make a significant theoretical contribution to knowledge. So common to both, or common to any piece of research, is that element of theorizing. Okay, and the word theorization is relevant whether you're talking about qualitative research or quantitative research. Researchers tend to think that in qualitative research you don't need theory, and that's not true. The best qualitative research are theoretically informed. Likewise, the role of theory in quantitative research cannot be disputed. It's just the way you make use of theory in qualitative and quantitative research that differs. Okay, and this is why I thought it's very, very important that we talk about the contemporary debate about theory. And let me tell you, it's a debate that's not happening in one type of field, it's all disciplines. Academy of Management Journal, for example, they've published a range of articles on theory, theorization, what theory is or is not. Sorry, this is not working. Oh, this one, sorry, yeah. Okay, so I would like to introduce this presentation by talking about the word theory. Theory means different things to different people. It's one of the most confusing terms for researchers, irrespective at which stage you are in your career. Okay, now, to be able to talk about what theory is, there are two ways in which can you hear me? Yes. Everyone? Good, okay. So there are two ways in which the term can be utilized. One is the colloquial use of the term. Okay, what we use in everyday jargon when we're having conversation with colleagues, with friends, with fellow researchers. And second is the scientific usage of the term. Now, the colloquial usage of the term is people would say, this is only a theory. Or people would say, a theory has got nothing to do with practice. Or they would say, theory is not equivalent to reality. Okay, but let me tell you, I'm someone very fond of theory. Okay, if I'm reviewing a paper or an external examiner for a PhD, I don't see the theory, I don't feel comfortable. And I can tell you that many of my fellow researchers, colleagues, reviewers, editors, share almost the same belief. Okay, now the scientific usage of theory denotes an explanation for a phenomenon. It explains why and how and under what circumstances a phenomenon occurs. And this is extremely very important. Now, I leave you a couple of seconds to make sense of what I'm presenting here. Anyone? So obviously, we all go to the swimming pool, or, you know. If you do not want to get drowned in the swimming pool, you need to make sure Nicolas Cage does not appear in movies. Look at the correlation. Sorry, I'm going to put the one. Oh, sorry, yes. No, it's fine. But anyway, oops. So the correlation value. Oh, no. Right. So there's a high correlation between the number of times Nicolas Cage appears in movies and the number of people who get drowned by falling in a swimming pool. The correlation is high. The correlation is there. Can anyone make sense of this? Anyone? So the more Nicolas Cage appears in movies, the more people get drowned in the swimming pool by falling in the swimming pool. Okay, you can't?
Yeah. So Nicolas Cage, forces people to run outside,
Yes.
dive into the
Exactly. It creates excitement.
there is some scenes where
What about this one? The more you consume cheese, the more you're likely to get entangled and die in your bedsheet, by your bedsheet. High correlation value, make no mistake about it, guys. You look at the correlation value, 0.94. Oh, what about this one? If you don't want to get divorced, you need to consume less margarine. And this one, I'm going to let you make sense out of this. No offense to anyone, but there are benefits of living in poor countries. As the GDP growth falls, the male organ grows instantly. That's not my diagram, by the way. You know, I picked it up on the internet from a working paper. We're going to talk about these type of things. Now, obviously, the point I'm trying to make in here, you could analyze relationship between different variables. There would be a correlation, but as researchers, it's our job to approximate reality, to study reality. But if I said to you, you know what? Personality would influence your behavior. If there's a correlation between personality and human behavior, would that make sense to you? Why you say yes? Because it makes sense. What the common people would say, yes, I see logic in it, I see some sense in it. Us researchers would say, it has a theoretical foundation. Okay, so I do not want you to get confused with the word theory. Theories are ways researchers in the scientific literature has modeled reality, has explained reality. You know, researchers try to complicate life, so we give it big name, theory. But in fact, theories explains reality, explains why and how and under what circumstances a phenomenon occurs. For example, this is what a theory does. It's a set of propositions that are logically connected, expressing the relation among several different constructs and propositions. Would I be right in saying your attitude influences your behavior? Would I be right in saying that your attitude towards a behavior influences your behavior? Right in here, that relationship between attitude and behavior is established in the existing literature. In fact, most of the behavioral theories, like theory of plant behavior, for example, makes that link. But if I say to you, you know, the size of this laptop, or whether Dr. Rupam is wearing a glass or not, that influences your behavior, you would say, Robin, you're talking nonsense. So your research, if you're doing a research, if you're engaging in a research like this, your research would be considered to be atheoretical, or doesn't make theoretical sense. Right? And this is why a theory is an abstract description of the relationship between concepts that helps us to explain, to understand. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
The
sorry.
online.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. Where am I? Yes, concepts to understand the world, to understand the phenomenon that we want to explain, to predict, to understand in our dissertation, in our research, in our papers. So remember one thing, a theory explains a phenomenon. Professor Mustafa, can I take you as an example? Do you dream? No? Why? Look at this. If you are a PhD student or a researcher studying why people dream, there are various explanations why do people dream. So when you go to the scientific literature, you will come across the activation synthesis theory of dream. Obviously, I'm not a neurology, I'm not a psychology, I don't know what the hell it means. But I know as a researcher, it will help me explain why people dream, why Professor Mustafa dreams every day. So there's an activation nerve cell in the pons fire spontaneously, and that leads to another event, the cerebral cortex attempt to make sense of the random world, whatever it is. Obviously, most of you probably are not aware of this, neither I am, right? But if you are a researcher understanding why people dream, you're using this theoretical perspective, are you likely to go wrong? Are you likely to go wrong if you're saying, look, I'm going to study dream from that theoretical perspective? Are you likely to go wrong? No, you're not likely to go wrong because it's a theory that is well established, that is well used. Now, be very careful in here. I'm not saying this is the only theoretical perspective that would help you understand why people dream. Nevertheless, it's one of the perspectives that help you understand the phenomenon you want to understand. Okay? And I would also want to clarify at this very point, you cannot do everything in your thesis. You cannot do everything in the research paper you're writing. A research paper, any piece of research, Nobel Prize winners, when they do research, remember that piece of research is characterized by conjecture. Conjecture is limited perspective, limited information. If you're using the activation synthetic theory of dreams, it's not everything. It's not the only perspective you can use, but it's one of the several perspectives that provides you with a kind of safety net. Your supervisor cannot challenge you. Even if they do, you say, no, you know what? This is a well-established theoretical perspective, and I'm using it to guide my research question, to guide my methodology, and to guide the way I would interpret my findings. Right? So obviously, when we use theory, it puts theoretical work squarely ahead of mere descriptive or survey work, which just states the phenomenon as they are. So if I go back to the various graph I showed you, you will never be able to make sense out of it because it's descriptive. You may find a correlation, but that correlation doesn't mean anything if there's no theoretical meaning out of it, guys. Right? So I made that point yesterday and would like to emphasize it again. Statistics or even your qualitative result does not make sense until you give it some sense. But let's say you say to me, and which often happens, you know, colleagues, researchers would write to me and say, Robin, I've got this big data set. Can we write a paper? Yes, we can. But can you tell me the theoretical foundation that guided the data collection? Oh, I didn't think of that, but it's too late. After you've collected your data, you cannot do anything with that data unless the data collection was based on a strong theoretical foundation. And this is why we all should work with the belief that all knowledge that exists is theoretically laden, which means that they have the foundation in theory, irrespective of the discipline we are working with, and all methods are theoretically driven. It's the theory that drives the methods. There cannot and shouldn't be a disjoint between your theory and the methodology. You know, and this is where, when you have big data, don't be excited you have big data. Oh, you know what, Robin, I've collected, data from 4,000 people. Oh, yes, I know that. Wow, I'm impressed. But that data doesn't mean anything unless there's the meaning in that data set. It's the theoretical meaning. And this relates to the chapter that comes after your result. Okay, usually chapter 5 or chapter 6. In an academic paper, it would be referred to as your discussion. Your discussion emphasizes on how you, as a researcher, are interpret. I call it a meaning-making chapter, a meaning-making discussion. You connect your result to reality, and that reality is reflected in that theoretical perspective you said you're going to use in your theoretical foundation. When you're writing your PhD dissertation, you have your chapter 2, right? Chapter 2, chapter 3, whatever you call it. The literature review, this is why another name for it, it's called the theoretical foundation. It's outlining the perspective that's guiding your research as a researcher. And this is why I've given you a quote by Gibbs in there that talks about, you may have empirical data that describe a phenomenon, right, without providing a clear explanation as to why that phenomenon occurs, right? And this becomes very descriptive, which was acceptable, probably 50, 60 years ago. Science progresses in two ways, theoretically and methodologically. For example, early research in psychology, they made it clear that people behave. Now we understand that people behave, but we also understand why do they behave the way they do. And that explanation is grounded in theory. It had a certain theoretical perspective behind it. Now, this brings me to a very important point that I've been discussing with colleagues over lunch yesterday and the day before. We all, encourage you to refer to academic journals. They are kind of mantra for the source of knowledge. They are the most credible source of knowledge because they are peer-reviewed. But I think at this stage, I would ask you to, when you're reading academic journal, read them with caution, right? Let me explain that argument further. Look at this. If you want to be a Nobel Prize, you need to eat lots of chocolate. And that's an article published in a journal by a very reputed, influential publisher. The journal is quite new, probably struggling to get papers. So the article is actually saying those who eat lots of Nobel Prize winners are those people who eat lots of chocolate. Now, let me emphasize, this is exactly what the article mentioned. So the theoretical perspective used by the author is this. According to the theory of mechanism doesn't exist. I did a search on theory of mechanism. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as theory of mechanism. In fact, the author themselves are admitting the research that I've done doesn't make sense. According to the theory of mechanism, the existence of such a mechanism, that is the relationship between chocolate consumption and Nobel Prize, makes the relationship less accidental, coincidental, or spurious. And that's another quote. Albeit no clear causal relationship exists between winning a Nobel Prize and chocolate or coffee consumption seems to exist, it remains unclear whether the effects are caused by hidden variable or by chance. So what are you saying? The research I've done is not good. Because initially, there is no theoretical explanation that could potentially explain why eating more chocolate would make you a Nobel Prize winner. published in an academic journal. So let's look at this one. Obesity of politician and corruption. Look at the damning argument the author makes. I've highlighted that in there. The result of saying that in your country, if you do not have an index of corruption, if you don't have a measure of corruption, just look at the obesity, the body mass index. So the worse the BMI is, the more corrupt your country is. That's what the results are saying in there. The results suggest that physical characteristics of politicians, such as the body mass index, can be used as a proxy variable for political corruption when the latter is not available at a very local level. If anyone can make sense out of this, you deserve a Nobel Prize, guys. Okay, you can't make sense out of this. Let's look at this one.
Very interesting to see that it was funded by the French government.
Yes. Well, obviously, when the government is giving you funding, the government does not go into the intricacies of theoretical foundation. The government is not interested in that, but that's our job as researchers. You know, I'm very careful of criticizing those papers because those papers have been published and funded by government, but yet they are left for us to learn. If us researchers, and I think there are many intelligent people in this room, if you can make sense out of it, that's good, but most of us cannot make sense out of it. So there's a problem out there. Look at this one. Why are you doing a PhD, guys? No. If you want to increase your research productivity, you need to have good looks. Physical appearance matter. So if someone like me, compared to him, very well dressed, formally dressed, his productivity is much higher. Not only that, if you read the full paper, the author makes another argument. Physical appearance impacts on your citation. Please read the paper. It's there. So the better you look, the more citation you get. So why are you all here, guys? Go and make yourself look better. Improve on your physical appearance. You will get good jobs. Papers will come out automatically. And you will get good citations. Right? Anyway, look at this one, published in The Economist. Making a correlation between overweight politician and trustworthiness. So, the heavier you are, the less trustworthy people think you are. When in fact, I've done my PhD in political economy, political trust. Political trust, the trust in politicians, is influenced by a range of factors, including culture, including institutional performance, and including other most important variables. I don't blame the economy. The economist is just replicating a result that the author came across. Right? So I think all this to tell you, anyone, can you make sense out of this? They are published journal, reputed publishers, but we are unable to see the logic because these articles have no or very weak theoretical foundation. Okay? Because that element of theoretical perspective, had they existed, they would have been able to explain the logical connection between the different variables that we have been discussing. It would have, if there was such a theory, there would have been a logical explanation why. You know, if Nicolas Cage appeared in films, the more Nicolas Cage appeared in films, the more people drown in swimming pool. There should have been a logical explanation. We are all logical people, we are all rational people in here, but we don't see that logical explanation. The researchers would say, you know what, these articles, they are empirically driven, okay, but lacks the theoretical foundation. And most damningly, the author themselves conclude, look, I'm not too sure why I've got the result. You know, the result is not making sense. They are saying the same thing, in an academic manner. Spurious correlation, the indirect effect. No, we don't need that. Okay, they are out there. I'm not criticizing the authors, but I think let's take some lesson out for us to understand the importance of theory, the importance of theoretical contribution, the importance of having a logical connection between the phenomenon and the other phenomenon that we want to investigate in our research. Now, this brings me to tourism research, and I think because Taylor's University have a big tourism program, large group PhD student and researcher, it's very important that I say a few words about tourism in tourism research. Tourism is not considered as a discipline. It's not considered as a discipline. It's more of a context in which travelers, tourists behave. Within tourism, there are very few theories. Tourist area life cycle, those who are aware of tourism, it explains how destination evolves over time. Even the tourist area life cycle emanates from the product life cycle, and also it goes far back into the life cycle of, people. I'm not too sure whether people or just living organism. Doxy's Redex model, we can say it originates from tourism. It explains host-guest relationships. Okay, now, when you look at tourism research, it has mostly relied from disciplines such as sociology, anthropology, economics, information system, and more recently now, neurology, to inform its intellectual development, to inform its conceptual development. Now, if you're doing tourism research, for those who are doing PhDs in tourism, of course, hospitality included, if you only read in the tourism literature, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. Yeah, you will only recycle ideas in a different way if you focus intrinsically in tourism, because as I said, most of the concept theories, theoretical perspective, name it, they come from outside the tourism discipline. So the concept you're applying in your tourism research, they are most likely coming from other disciplines. I've given you some examples. Research on travel behavior has drawn a lot from behavioral theories in psychology. For example, those who are aware of the theory of planned behavior. Theory of planned behavior doesn't emanate from tourism. It emanates from psychology. More recently now, tourism researchers are using neurological perspective to study travel behavior. So neurology, sociology, psychology, they are outside the field of tourism, guys. Host-guest relationship. Many of you are doing resident attitude towards tourism. Most of the theories do not come from tourism field. They've been studied from a sociological, anthropological perspective, and in some papers from an economic perspective. Traveler attitude towards technology. The theoretical underpinning come from the IS discipline. So one of the lessons for researchers, for tourism researchers, for PhD students studying tourism is that you should read broader. Go beyond tourism, because there's nothing in tourism. Obviously, you need to be aware how that theorization has been applied to tourism, which is very important. I'm not undermining that at all. But if you're someone researching travel behavior, go out there in sociology, psychology, economics, neurology, anthropology, see how those researchers in those fields have studied behavior, have studied human behavior. That's how you make the best research. That's how you build on the field. If you read within tourism, I repeat again, you will keep on recycling ideas. And that obviously would lead to more of a replication of knowledge, which is acceptable at bachelor's and master's level, but not at all at PhD, and not at all when you're writing papers for journal articles. For academic journals. Good, and I think I've already mentioned that statement. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you a research question, and we are going to look at how do we theorize that research question. Okay, I've given an example. What is the impact of online reviews on travelers' attitude to Sunway Lagoon as a tourist destination? The reason I use Sunway Lagoon is because I've just been there. Now, obviously, I did a presentation like this at Griffith University, so I changed Sunway Lagoon to Gold Coast in Australia, right? Now, you agree with me that online reviews are very influential now. Before you consume a product, before you consume a service, and when you look at the tourism literature, online reviews is very influential in destination choice. It impacts travel satisfaction, destination choice, revisit intention, all those behavior that are highly relevant to tourism organization, to destination marketing organization. So from an academic perspective, it's a well-documented topic. So in your dissertation now, let's say you make a statement, online reviews, influence, the on shouldn't be here, online reviews influence travelers' attitude towards Sunway Lagoon. What can you make out from this statement? Anyone? Would I be right in saying it's a very descriptive statement? It's telling me nothing. It's just telling me online reviews influence travelers' attitude towards Sunway Lagoon, right? It doesn't explain the mechanism through which that happens. So if you are a PhD student or writing a paper on this topic, making a statement like this would be considered to be very descriptive and atheoretical. Atheoretical means it has no theoretical basis. It makes sense. Yeah, we all know that. Right? So you should explain. Theorization requires what? You explain why, how, and under what circumstances online reviews on social media influence users' attitude. That requires theorization. Because as I said, theory provides a logical explanation as to how, why, and in what circumstances a phenomenon occurs. Now, expanding on this idea, when you look at the, now you need to be able to link your concept to broader concept. Look at this one. So online reviews influence traveler attitude towards Sunway Lagoon. Now, if you want to do your search on this topic, what keywords you would have used? UGC, yes, user-generated content, online reviews, social media. Would you use travelers in the very first search? If you use travelers, what happens? It would automatically restrict the search to the tourism literature. Whereas when you look at online reviews, the concept were never developed only from tourism. So let's look at what happens in the broader literature. In the broader literature, which is the communication expert in here, there are various theories, such as the influence of presumed media influence. I'm not asking you to go into the technicalities of the theoretical perspective. And you have the elaboration likelihood model, obviously they've been criticized, they've been used. Nevertheless, they can be used to answer the research question. They can be used to answer the research question. So when you look at those two theories, obviously they provide two different perspectives on how media messages influence attitude and consequently behavior. Those two theories have got nothing to do with tourism. They have been developed in the communication literature, in the advertising literature, but they can be used to explain the phenomenon that you want to apply in a tourism context, right? So note that both of the theories have been developed in other disciplines, not only for use in tourism research. If you are in the discipline of sociology, you're looking at a similar research question, those theories becomes very useful. And in fact, you can combine theories. Combining theories is conceptually known as triangulation. You look at the same phenomenon from more than one theoretical perspective. Nevertheless, those theories provide your reader with a good understanding, not only about the fact that online reviews or media messages influence travel attitude, but why, how, and under what circumstances that phenomenon of attitude change occur. So, look at this one. This is the elaboration likelihood model. Just to quickly go through that, not into the technicalities, basically the ELM suggests when you come across a persuasive messages, it might be advertising. So in the context of what we're discussing, what's the persuasive messages? Online reviews. So you process online reviews through two routes. The central route, where you're more involved in that messages, you're cognitively more involved in that messages, but you can also process that messages through the peripheral route. Nevertheless, look at this. The first one is saying it leads to lasting attitude change. The other one is temporary change in attitude. I'm not saying these theories are perfect. They've been criticized. In fact, the virtue of a good theory is that it is a limited but precise explanation of a phenomenon. So someone can say, but Robin, these theories have been criticized. Yes, all theories have been criticized. As far as I know, in my humble opinion, there has been no theories that has been deemed as perfect. The fact that you have theories means that it's our job as researchers to apply those theories to understand where are they relevant, where are they less relevant, and where they could potentially be not relevant at all. So look at this statement now. What difference do you make? I give you a few seconds to read this. What difference do you make between this statement and the one where I mentioned online reviews influence traveler attitude to Sunway? Look at this one. Is it more elaborate? Is it explaining why and the mechanism through which online reviews that the theory considers to be a persuasive message would eventually lead to a change in attitude? This is what you're expected to do in your dissertation when you're writing your paper targeting a journal. This is theorization. This is theorization. You're explaining why the process through which online reviews influence attitude change or leads to attitude change towards a phenomenon. Right? When you put an argument such as this in front of the reader, you remove the cognitive burden on your reader and the reviewer. If it's an academic journal that's under peer review, you can't ask them to go and find out why you are saying X should influence Y. You're providing the logical explanation in here why you think as a researcher that X should influence Y. It's not like chocolate consumption and Nobel Prize. It's not like margarine consumption and divorce rate. There's no logical explanation. In here, that explanation is grounded in the scientific literature. I mentioned another theoretical perspective, which is the influence of presumed influence, that you can actually use to understand why media messages, online reviews in our context would lead to attitude change. In fact, from this perspective, from the IPIM perspective, its influence of presumed influence, the reason media messages is so influential in people's attitude and behavior, because all of us think that it's influencing millions of other people's attitude and behavior. This is why we adapt our attitude to conform to the norm. Now, if you're using those two theoretical perspectives as the foundation of your research, are you likely to go wrong? Are you likely to be challenged? Yes, you can be challenged. You will be challenged. But can you refute? Yes, you can refute. But you cannot refute If someone challenges you, why would consumption of margarine leads to divorce? Can anyone convince me of the logical explanation? There's no logical explanation. There's absolutely no sense in saying that margarine consumption would lead to divorce. And likewise in here, I have grounded a statement why online reviews should lead to changes in attitude based on the IPI. And you will find that the mechanism through which online reviews, media messages leads to attitude change is different. So the point I'm trying to make in here, firstly, your research should have a strong theoretical foundation grounded in the scientific literature, bearing in mind that the same phenomenon you are investigating in your dissertation can be explained using different theoretical perspective. One of the common questions I often get from my student, master and PhD, they said to me, you know what, the topic has already been done. Or my friend in the class is doing the same topic. No problem. The topic may be the same, but the theoretical perspective may be completely different. So it's not about the topic. It's not about, you can have the same research question, right? The same methodology, but the theoretical perspective would be totally different, and that's what we need. At the end of the day, there are various theories out there that could potentially inform your research question in a way that your research question, the perspective, and eventually the result cannot be challenged. It brings credibility to your result. It brings credibility to what you are saying as a researcher. And that credibility, in fact, it's not you that gives the credibility. You act through the scientific literature. You act through the theoretical perspective that explain the phenomenon in such a way that you cannot be challenged, such that someone says to you, what you are doing doesn't make sense. Now, this brings me to a very important point. Because the quest for theory, the importance of theory, researchers are obsessed with theory. It's like sustainability. In all papers, they mention the term sustainable development. And now, SDGs. Same thing has happened with the word theory. Researchers think that when reviewer would see the word theory, or when your external examiner for your PhD thesis would see the word theory, or they would be impressed, and they would actually say, your research is theoretically grounded. That's not true. Research in most disciplines have reached such level of maturation now, reviewers can distinguish between a lip service to the term theory and to a real use of the term theory that in a way that fits the scientific paradigm, the scientific way of doing things. Look at this. References are not theory. Look at this statement that I mentioned in here. According to the IPI and the ELM, online reviews influence people's attitude and behaviors. Would you say this statement is theoretically grounded? And you give lots of citations, 10 citations after this, 10 citations after this statement. No, you have provided a lip service to the word theory. An experienced reviewer, an experienced examiner would automatically know, you have used citation to hide the absence of a theory. To hide the absence of a theory. This is why I mention in here, references, citations are not theory. Theory means you go in depth. This is why you have a specific section in any good research on theoretical foundation. It is in that section you explain the logic behind what you are doing. And that section is often taken lightly, theoretical foundation. So you need to be aware that it's one of the, all sections, all parts of the research process are important, but that theoretical foundation is extremely, extremely very important. So do not use citation to hide the absence of a theory, because it becomes evident to the reader that, hang on, first, you don't know how to make use of theory. Your research does not have a clear theoretical perspective, so you are doomed. I don't need your paper. You know what? I'm going to reject it and accept someone else's paper. You need to remember, guys, it's cruel for me to say that, okay? But editors, they need, and I'm not saying that in a very negative way, editors needs reason to reject your paper. Any reason become a good reason. Do you know why? Because there are always better papers. In my journal, we receive around 1,000 to 1,200 submissions a year. We will publish only 40 of them. We have a page limitation, right? So the first thing we do, out of the 1,200 papers we receive every year, we just reject 80% of them. The remaining 20% goes under review. 80% of that 20% would almost be rejected. This is why people would say to you, rejection is the norm. It's not an exception. Last week, I had my paper test rejected from Journal of Travel Research. It's normal. I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't be ashamed of the research I'm produced. It's just that there are better papers out there. So every reason becomes a good reason for someone, for an editor, reviewer to reject your paper. Now, rejecting your paper does not mean that your paper is not good. It means that probably it lacks theoretical foundation. It may be based on strong theory, but I don't see the theoretical contribution in there. It's not advancing the field of study. Right? And to conclude later on, I'll make the distinction between theoretical foundation and theoretical contribution. I'll talk about that. Now, listing data are not theory. If data were theory, all the graph I presented at the very early stages of the presentation, you should have taken it to be logical, because they are based on big data. They are based on big data. So simply presenting your data, your analysis, making it look complicated, sophisticated statistics, doesn't mean your research is good. Okay? There's a tendency for researchers to believe the more statistics they use, mediating variable, moderating variable, multiple mediation model, all these work extremely well if your theoretical model is grounded in existing theory. If it's just a model or diagram, look at this. That's one of my diagrams that's we published in Annals of Tourism Research in 2012. How would you call that? A theory? How would you call that? And it's one of the most cited papers. Do you think it got cited because of this diagram? Be careful, this is not the theory. So diagrams are not theory. When I'm saying to you, attitude towards positive impact of tourism would influence support for island tourism, that's not the theory. The theory would explain the logical connection between the variables. That's what the theory, and if you want to read about the theory in this paper, you go to my literature review. Simply presenting a model like this, I often see researchers would say, you know what, the theory is presented in figure 1. So when I look at the figure 1, it's their structural model. The structural model is not the theory. The theory, now remember, many theories are not visual. They are in the form of narrative. Social exchange theory, for example, the original social exchange theory is not visual. It's in the literature, it's narrative. This theoretical model that you see is based on the identity theory and the social exchange theory, both originating from sociology. So simply presenting the variables in here, saying resource-based identity would influence attitude, that's not the theory. The theory is the narrative, the narration that supports the development of that structural equation model. And I need to make that clear because I see papers that considers this as the theory. Forget it. You may impress some reviewers, but as I said, most disciplines now have reached such a stage of maturation, they would say, yes, but what's the logical connection? It seems to me that you've connected the variable together to tell me a story without telling me the logic behind the story. The support for this theoretical model goes back to your theoretical foundation. I personally, and I think Professor Mustafa as well, would like to go visual with structural model. But that visualization is a way to represent our research question using a certain perspective or more than one perspective as the theoretical foundation. Now, sorry, it's not the conclusion I thought through. Let's look at the second part of the presentation now, is how do you actually make use of theory in your research? So I'll come back to the research question again. What is the impact of online reviews on travelers' attitude to Sunway Lagoon as a tourist destination? That's the research question we initially started with. Whenever you have a research question, you need to look for a theoretical perspective. This is why, if you are an early career researcher or even established researcher, especially if you're a PhD student, what's the average length of a PhD? 4 years? Why do you think you're given 4 years? Because of the funding? No. Remember, as a PhD student, as a PhD graduate, irrespective of the topic, you are being trained to become a domain expert. And a domain expert doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by reading a couple of papers, providing lip service to your reading time. You are given 4 years precisely because you are asked to read and read and read and read. I often say it 7 times. To mention you need to read 7 times a week, which means every day. And a PhD, even when we write papers, I find it very difficult for me to start a paper today, and because of my family commitment, continue that paper a month after. I'm lost. But the PhD student, that consistency is important. So what does that involve? Reading, reading, reading 7 times. You know why? You are expected to understand the concepts you are dealing with. Where do they originate from? How they have evolved over time in the existing literature. That's first thing. You're expected to know, to identify which theoretical perspective you will be using. Question that I get from my PhD student, they tell me, oh, which theoretical perspective I need to use. Do you know what I tell them? You're asking me to whom you should get married. That's your job. Your supervisor can guide you, but it's your job for you to come to your supervisor and say, look, this is my theoretical perspective derived from, physics, chemistry, earth sciences that I want to use. I always say one thing to my PhD student: supervise your supervisor to supervise your work. Supervise your supervisor to supervise your work. You bring the work in front of your supervisor. You convince your supervisor why this approach is useful, why the theoretical perspective is useful. supported from the literature, what do you think your supervisor would say to you? It's not good? It's good. So who's actually convinced who? So it's your job, guys, not the supervisor's job. And this is very important. I need to mention that because you need to become the expert, not your supervisor. No matter how many publications I have, Professor Mustafa has, others have, we are not the expert. You should become the expert. Because after your PhD, you'll be into academia, you'll be publishing, you are meant to do independent piece of work. You should tell me now, the other question that I often get is, okay, I've come across 7 theoretical perspectives. Do I need to read all 7 in depth? Yes. Does that mean you need to use them? Why? Because you need to understand not only theoretical perspective you're going to use, what are the alternative theoretical perspective that you could have used? So you broaden your knowledge. A PhD, writing a paper, does not only mean reading material that's directly relevant. Yes, you will be making use of material that's directly relevant, but you will also be reading material that may not be directly relevant, but which is of relevance to the topic in general. You know, when I work on a topic that I don't know, I'm not familiar with, I would download probably 100 papers. Probably only 40 of them would be useful to me. But to know which is useful, which is not useful, I need to read the 100. You will find that you have a different perspective in the literature. You will be someone who would not only master the topic, but you will be able to know your concepts, the limitation, theoretical perspective, etc. So identification of a proper theoretical perspective, guys, depend on the depth and breadth of your reading. And that reading should often take place beyond your discipline. Of course, you need to know how those concepts have been used in your discipline, but the concepts that emanate from your discipline, the origin may have been from other disciplines. Very often, when I review paper on customer satisfaction, I see the authors have cited lots of recent papers, but have not cited the seminal papers that initially discuss customer satisfaction. Oliver, for example, in the 1980, talks about the expectancy disconfirmation theory of customer satisfaction. So as the reviewer, what impression do I have of this candidate or the author? You've cited, you're using a concept, you don't even know where the concept originates from. This is why in your PhD dissertation, it's not only about using those concepts, but it's also understanding the historical evolution of that concept, guys. It's about understanding how in the scientific literature, those concepts have evolved over time. The meaning have changed over time. So obviously, reading, depth, breadth, keep on reading is extremely very important. It's also very important to be able to understand which theoretical perspective you're going to use. It's extremely very important that you identify the broader concept. So let's come back to the research question on travelers' attitude towards Sunway Lagoon and the social media online reviews. So what I have done in both in here, I've highlighted the key concepts: online reviews and attitude. Why have I not highlighted travelers in my initial identification? So if I go to Google Scholar, I type online reviews, travelers, and attitude, what would it give me? The mere fact that I have included travelers, it would narrow down my search to tourism and hospitality literature, when in fact, none of those concepts, online reviews, attitude change, emanate from tourism. The broader concept would be social media, messages, online reviews, attitude change, perception. And it's very important that you identify the search terms that are related to your concept. It might sound very simple, But if you go to Google Scholar, you insert the wrong search term, what happened to you? You will get information that would be mostly irrelevant. This is when you would go to your supervisor, you would say you are lost. Yeah, you are lost because your search term was wrong. As simple as this step sounds, it's extremely very important. So when you go to Google Scholar now, you type online reviews and attitude change, social media and attitude change, media messages and attitude change, you will actually see that they are telling you the same thing, but the keywords are different. And I did it. I went to Google Scholar, I typed online reviews and attitude change. Look at the first article, forget about the quality of the journal. I'm not focusing on the quality of the journal, but the information that it gives me. Without even opening the article, it talks about the ELM. So now when you read the article, you would obviously identify ELM as one of the perspectives that you could use. Now, once you identify the ELM as one of the perspectives, it's your job now to go and read in depth about the elaboration likelihood model. Where does it come from? How has it evolved? How has it been used? Of course, when you've crossed that stage, then you will need to decide, okay, how has it been used in my discipline? Then you would include travel, tourism in here. Look at the second one, talks about attitude change. Look at the third one. HSM and ELM discuss information processing method. Right now, you've got another theory, which is HSM. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you, because I didn't open it. But I know it would be a theoretical perspective that could potentially be used to answer my research question. So my keyword in here relates to online reviews and attitude change. My other slide now slightly twisted the keyword. From online reviews, I've used media, attitude change. The first paper I get is elaboration and validation process, implication for attitude change. Do you think that's relevant, the first one? It's got nothing to do with travel. It's got nothing to do with Sunway. But do you think it's relevant? Directly relevant. Because it relates to the process through which media influences attitude, through which media leads to attitude change. So again, guys, your search terms are extremely very important. Now, so I've emphasized that already. You should become a domain expert. You know, I've been on PhD defense. I've examined PhD dissertation. We review papers. I'm an editor, the reviewer, I'm an author myself. You can easily distinguish between someone who really mastered the topic, the concept, and someone who's actually tried to write a paper without understanding the concept as a whole, without understanding the origin, the evolution, right? Or the intricacies involved in this concept. So from your broad and exhaustive reading, you will come across various theoretical perspective that has been used to, obviously in the context of your research, messages, online reviews, attitude change. You should identify the most theoretical, the most appropriate theoretical perspective. It doesn't mean that if there's 10 theoretical perspectives that lies out there, it doesn't mean you need to use all 10. It doesn't mean you need to mention all the 10. Remember, your literature review, or what you call your theoretical foundation, is not telling your reader something about everything. It's not about that. The literature review is precisely there so that the readers are able to understand that every citation, every references, every argument you've made are deliberate and thoughtful. They're the reason why you've included that. You can mention the 10 different theories, but as a supervisor, I wouldn't expect 5-6 pages on each theory when you're not going to use it. I would expect that you go in depth in the theories that informs your research, not on all theories. And this is why you have a literature review chapter. Within that, you have a theoretical foundation. People call it different name, but they are there for a reason. The reason is to outline your theoretical perspective And there has been a couple of studies that looked at how PhD examiners examine PhD dissertation. They look at the introduction, they spend more time on the literature review. Because this is where you explicitly demonstrate knowledge about your topic. If your chapter 2 is weak, I'm already cognitively biased against your work. If I'm a reviewer, I would click the beautiful button there that click reject. It's a simple one, small dot. And very often as an editor, I get comments from reviewers saying, this paper should not have even been sent under review. Reviewers are nasty. They do the job free to remove the cognitive burden from the reviewer, guys. And of course, for any theoretical perspective, discuss their origin, their use, their evolution from a broader perspective before discussing its use in tourism research or its use in your discipline. Follow the funnel-like process. Start broad and then see how it's applied in your discipline, especially when the concept, the perspective emanate from other discipline. You also need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your theoretical perspective, bearing in mind that the beauty of a theory is that it is a limited and precise picture of a phenomenon. There's no theory that's very generic. Now, obviously, I won't go into detail with that, but when you look at a theory, there's definition of variables. A theory, its job, it breaks reality into different components. A theory breaks reality into different components. Those components are scientifically known as variables. In qualitative research, you don't make use of variables because that's a paradigmic term that's associated with qualitative research. Yet a theory in qualitative research has almost the same function, with the exception that you won't take qualitative research, but it would inform, guide your theoretical perspective from a broader level. But from a uniquely quantitative perspective, a theory comprises of variables. Each variable represents one aspect of reality. Together, they explain reality. Domain. Are you all familiar with the theory of planned behavior? The theory of planned behavior is a theory developed in psychology, very well used in many fields, to explain all behavior that are planned. So, do you think if you're doing on blood donation, do you think you can use theory of planned behavior, whatever it is? Is blood donation a planned behavior or unplanned? Unplanned? Can I just come and take out blood from you now? No, I can't. It's planned. Travel behavior, planned or unplanned? Purchase of organic food, planned. So if you're saying you're going to use the theory of planned behavior to investigate accident, you are doomed. You got the domain wrong. Every theory has a domain. The domain is the exact setting or circumstances where the theory can be applied. Technology acceptance model, are you all aware of it? Can you use it if you're ultimately interested in acceptance of non-technological devices? No, you get the domain wrong. So be very careful when you're using a theory. You may be using a well-established theory, strong theory, in the wrong context. In this case, what happens? Close your dissertation, stop writing the paper, go to Sunway Lagoon. Because you are doomed. Right? And of course, a theory always engages in relationship building. Those arrows that you often see, that's the relationship building. It connects the variable together to explain why and how the phenomenon occurs. And from a purely quantitative perspective, a theory always makes specific prediction. It predicts a phenomenon. Now, look at this. Try to see if I'm making sense of what I'm presenting. go back to my research question. How does online reviews affect travelers' attitude towards Sunway Lagoon as a destination? And this is based on the IPI, influence of presumed media influence. So what I'm saying in here, when you're exposed to online reviews on Sunway Lagoon, that impacts on perception of peer exposure to online reviews on Sunway Lagoon. It influences on how you think others are being influenced. That leads to H3. It looks at the impact of perception of peer exposure on the perceived influence. Then you think, okay, how are others perceived to be influenced by social media online reviews? And then that leads to attitude change. Look at this. First stage, own exposure to online reviews. Second, presume exposure, presume influence of online reviews on others. And this is how you adapt your attitude. Is this the model or the theory? Based on what? Can anyone challenge me? Challenge me doesn't mean you say this is the only model. Challenging me doesn't mean that you say, you know what, these are the only factors. Yes, these are not the only factors, but I would want you to challenge me on the logic. Anyone? No, because I've used the influence of presumed media influence. My hypothesis in here will be well grounded in the existing literature. The narrative in your dissertation now, the narrative in the academic paper should be written to support that theoretical model. So in your literature review, I would expect to see which theoretical perspective in detail that informs the development of this structural model. The hypothesis reflects the relationship building stage of the theory. Finally, to conclude, strong research requires strong theorization, unless you want to engage in Nicolas Cage type of research or margarine consumption type of research. Now, one thing I think passing comment, very often I see even PhD theorists sometimes saying, you know what, or even academic journals, this research has been done all over the world, but not in Gold Coast. So that's my contribution. That's a contextual contribution which is not important unless you explain how that context contribute to theoretical contribution, make that theoretical contribution. So research is not about contextual contribution. Research is about strong theoretical contribution. Now, I'm making in my third statement in here a difference between theoretical foundation and theoretical contribution. Anyone? What's theoretical foundation? Is what we've been discussing. There's one group of research that theoretically flawed, reject. There's another one that have a strong theoretical foundation, very good research, but there's nothing new. It's good research, very good. So you would expect undergraduate level, master's level dissertation to engage in a research that theoretical foundation. But doctoral research, when you're publishing in top journals, that requires both theoretical foundation and theoretical contribution. And of course, methodological contribution also comes into play. So be wary of that. So obviously, doctoral research is also about theoretical contribution. Having a strong theoretical foundation is not enough. And also think about the link between theory and methodology. If I come back to this, now you know from a quantitative perspective, you have to measure all those variables. So what your theory says influence the design of your instrument. It actually informs in that questionnaire, survey or experiment, what should you be measuring? You should be measuring exposure, perception, perceived influence, and eventually attitude. So it's informing your methodology. And that's extremely very important. So I'll conclude by emphasizing again, all knowledge is theory-laden, while all methods are theory-driven. Thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Prof. Robin. I would like to invite you to the right side of the room, and I would like to. Oh, Q&A. Oh, sorry, Q&A. I forgot about it. I'm so sorry. So I would like to invite any questions from the floor.
I'm tired, bear that in mind.
Don't ask, I get. Yes.
Prof. Ruby require a theory, right? But I come across some article. They try to extend, and just now you mentioned that diagram is not a theory.
Yes.
Just now what you propose
Yes.
is, but with a gasoil is just a conceptual framework.
Yes.
But I come across some article. They try to extend the conceptual framework of other author, drawing upon maybe Robbins and the gasoil. So
yes.
is it acceptable? Because maybe they just add
No,
some moderator.
It's very acceptable, but again,
But there's no strong theoretical.
no,
Why-
but then I would question it. Why are you including those variables and not others?
Yes.
So even any extension of an existing theoretical perspective, the way it's been utilized, should come from another theoretical. I'll give you a very good example. I was associate editor for Annals of Tourism Research for a while. So I published a lot of papers on how power influenced resident attitude towards tourism. Right? So obviously, one of the researchers from the US submitted a paper, it came to me to deal with. Right? So the gist of the paper were that criticizing my own research, saying, look, Nunkoo have utilized power as a unidimensional construct, which I did. That person came up with a different theoretical perspective, suggesting that power should incorporate political empowerment, social empowerment, and economic empowerment. So he used a totally different theoretical perspective to extend the work that I have used.
Okay.
And this brings me to a very important point, including mediators, moderators, having beautiful theoretical model would make sense only if each of the variable and relationship are theoretically justified.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question from our online participant. What is the difference between theory and model? I'd like to understand the distinction between theory, for example, the theory of planned behavior, the theory of reason action, social exchange theory, and model, stimulus organism response, do coffee model.
Right.
So
Right.
theory and model, are they interchangeable?
There's 5 questions in one.
Yeah.
First question, yes.
I want to add to this question.
Yes.
And you can maybe answer
Sure.
together. As this person mentioned here, we have when we go to the literature, we have 2 types of theory.
Yes.
One type of theory, we can see exactly some variable
Exactly.
construct,
Yes.
like theory of planned behavior.
Yes.
But some theory, we don't have any variable,
No.
but just we have some principles.
Exactly.
And concept that
Exactly.
explain relationship like social exchange.
Exactly.
So what's your opinion on this?
Good. All right. First question. I think the first question looks at the distinction between TPB and TRA. Now, theory of reason action were the original theory developed by Ajden and Fishburne in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. Right? So this is the job of researchers. What I'm going to mention is the job of researchers. They've applied the theory under different circumstances. So if you look at the theory of planned behavior, the theory of reason action, it includes attitude and subjective norms impacting on human behavior. So after testing the theory in different contexts, they came back and say, okay, there's something lacking in the theory. The theory predictive power can be improved. Then they added the construct of perceived behavioral control in 1991 to make the theory of planned behavior. This in itself suggests that it's our job to keep on testing theories so that we develop better theories. So the theory of planned behavior emanates from the theory of reason action. The theory of reason action did not include the perceived behavioral control construct, whereas the TPB actually include the perceived behavioral construct. Khalil, I hope that answered the first question. Second one, right. Model and theory, it's very confusing. For example, the technology acceptance model. Is that a theory or a model? It's both. But when you look at the theory of the technology acceptance model, it draws partly from the theory of reason action. It still includes the impact of attitude towards the technology on behavior. I would not get bogged down with the term model and theory. In some context, in some cases like the technology acceptance model, the term can be used at the theoretical perspective. But the model I presented, in fact, this model, that's not a theory. So you cannot use this as a theoretical perspective saying, according to the theory, because this is not a theory. So there is lots of confusion with the term theory, model, framework. Right? Second question. No, yes and no for theory. Third question. So previous study explained SOR, the stimulus organism response theory. Is it correct to use this? No, it's not a question of correct which theory do you use. It's a question of the argument you make as to which perspective you're going to use. In 2023, you still have papers, for example, making use of the theory of reason action, but it's not about which theory are you using. It's whether what you're doing is wrong or right depends on the rationale behind it. So yes, you can use the modified version, you can use the original version, but what I would like to see as a reviewer is justification. That's the most important thing. Writing is very political. You write to convince. Do not write merely to be understood. Write in such a way so that you are not misunderstood. Coming back to Professor Mustafa's question, some theories are visual, easily applied, easily tested. For example, theory of planned behavior. The origin of the theory has been very visual. But some theories are not visual at all. In fact, when you look at social exchange theory, it's not visual. Social exchange theory was initially discussed by Blow in 1964, extended by 1976. There was nothing visual. But yes, there are certain principles, as you rightly mentioned. So what researchers have done then, they've applied those principles to develop variables, and social exchange theory now has been applied to, I think, in most fields, sociology, anthropology, economics, human resources, business management. So my own perspective on it is that it's not about whether it's visual or not, it's about whether as researchers we are able to explain the principles underlying the theory. In fact, social exchange theory is not one theory. It's an amalgamation of different theories combined together. Researchers obviously have disintegrated the theory, but I think this is how a field should evolve. You know, social exchange theory has evolved such that now we can see the theory visually. So my perspective on both is that the principle is important than whether it's visual or not.
I have a name for these two types of
Yes.
theory. I want to know your opinion. So I call those stories that we have exactly relationship between variable and concept as a structured theory. And those stories that we don't have and only we have some principles as unstructured theory.
Agreed.
Oh, okay.
Agreed.
I have confirmation from you.
I cannot disagree, can I?
For this name.
I cannot disagree. Right.
We have another two questions, so I'll be reading the first one first. According to my attention to the qualitative articles published in top Chinese tourism journals over the past few years, I've noticed a scarcity in articles employing anthropological writing styles. Most articles have used grounded theories, even if not explicitly using this method. They often claim to have employed a strictly coded analysis of their data. Based on my attention to several top anthropology journals, both grounded theory and coding have been popular methods. In my Web of Science search using related keywords, I noticed a declining trend in the number of articles starting from 2020. Does this decline imply that the cultural writing approach for anthropology is no longer recognized within our discipline? And is there still a future for tourism scholars conducting anthropological research in tourism?
Yes, I think the decline should not be interpreted of not acceptable or you're questioning the legitimacy of qualitative research. Not at all. The decline may be various to different reasons. It might be at that point in time, the researchers had funding to do more quantitative research. So that decline is not attributed, and I think, Jingbing, the decline is not attributed to the legitimacy of qualitative research. In fact, as a highly quantitative researcher, I welcome qualitative research now. And it reemphasizes the point that you make. And to me, it's not about, I'm not too sure that in today's world, some journals may do, but most of the journal would not reject an article because it is of qualitative research. There might be some exception. I'll give you a good example. Journal of Travel Research, American-based journal, has traditionally been quantitative. But I've published 3 papers in Journal of Travel Research using phenomenological approach. And I had very good comments from reviewers, very valuable comment. So I think researchers now, reviewers, editors, are becoming more pragmatic. There's a very nice paper, probably, you should read it, on becoming a pragmatic researcher. Okay, there's lots and lots of articles advocating qualitative research. In fact, I would use this as an opportunity to say, look, most of the topics that have been studied have used a positivistic approach. My research takes an anthropological perspective to this topic. If your article will get rejected, it's not because it's using qualitative research. There might be other flaws, but no, I wouldn't attribute that to the legitimacy of qualitative research at all. So you have a second question, Eva.
Is there still a future for tourism scholars conducting anthropology?
Of course, I think there is. Yesterday, I made a present. Was that yesterday? Yes. Yesterday, I made a presentation on the interdisciplinarity of sustainable tourism research. Anthropology contributes to a negligible percentage of tourism research. We need more research from anthropology. Likewise, we need more research from sociology. So that's another opportunity for you out there. I would turn that into strength.
All right. Let's take the last question for this session. If I do exploratory research, such as a topic about cultural change in minority society, is theory underpinnings necessary?
I'll be very honest. I'm not too sure I understand the difference between exploratory, explanatory, all those funky terms that's used. Okay, because I don't think there's a clear distinction out there as to how do you define exploratory research. But to me, cultural change in minority societies can be well understood using anthropological perspective. Irrespective of whether they are exploratory, explanatory, or whatever it is, your research should have a theoretical foundation. But I reemphasize my point again, that how you make use of theory in a qualitative and quantitative research, that should be taken care of.
Shall we have
Khalil, yes, we can.
Thank you, Prof. Robin. Let me switch.
Yes.
Are there any questions? Oh, sorry.
Well, before I jump in, allow me to say hi to my supervisor there, Dr. Stephanie. Yes, yes. So first of all, I would like to convey my gratitude to you for visiting our school. Thank you for your time and efforts spending. I think, I learned a lot of insightful and academic contributions. So thank you. My name is Yasser, coming from Saudi Arabia, pursuing a PhD in hospitality and tourism. So as far as my understanding, in terms of, let's say, building a structure model based on a theory, and to me, it's useless if you do not interpret in, let's say, an efficient way, right? So since we have, a lot of, let's say, basically audience, or you call readers, right? I mean, people have different mindset. So how would you find an easy approach that, can be understood from each reader?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay, so we're talking about, let's say, a structure model, right?
Yes.
Based on a theory,
Yes.
right? And what you mentioned yesterday, I mean, and also in relation with what you presented today,
Yes.
right? You need to interpret this to your audience, to your reader,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Right. So we have different readers, we have different audience, right? Who think differently, they have different, let's say, background. How do you find an easy way to
Okay.
explain that to them?
Now, irrespective of the background your readers come from, there are some scientific principles that we all agree on. Okay, if you're talking about structural equation modeling, when the technique was first introduced in tourism research, and likewise, the same problem happened in communication studies in psychology, the initial papers that published structural equation modeling in tourism research, for example, they had that structural equation model without a theoretical foundation. But when you think about it, all reviewers know now, all readers know, irrespective of their background, that structural equation modeling being a confirmatory technique, you need to have theoretical foundation. So I'm not too sure whether those general scientific principles would differ between someone in economics, education, communication. We all follow the same scientific principle. So there's no way out. Right? So I'm not too sure whether you need to be concerned about how do you interpret it. Your reviewer, your external examiner will never reject your paper if they have a different interpretation, unless there's a fatal error in your theoretical foundation and eventually your structural equation modeling, and that would disintegrate into your result. So I wouldn't be concerned. I wouldn't be concerned at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I confirm, are there any more questions from the floor?
Oh my God.
Most of your discussion actually focus on quantitative.
Yes. Yes.
When we have a relationship between
Yes.
variables.
Yes.
What about qualitative? Because qualitative research is actually to follow inductive approach.
Exactly.
And in inductive approach, we are supposed to develop theories.
Yes.
So what's the role of theory for qualitative?
That has been a debate for a long time. Okay, there is no need for qualitative research. I think one of the famous books that I've read on qualitative research is that by Kati Sharmas. Okay, he's the one that initially grounded theory. And the argument that has been made there and obviously since then is that the best qualitative research should be theoretically informed. But as I said, you use the theory broadly. For example, we publish a paper in JTR looking at socialization, how travelers with different levels of social capital, they engage with one another. So we use social capital theory at the broad theoretical perspective. Okay, we never mention that these are the variables that represent social capital, these are the relationship, but our findings were interpreted in the light of the theories, but other things would come out. There would be new element that would come out. And in this way, this is why from a philosophical perspective, you would say qualitative research is more inductive, while quantitative research is more deductive. Now, do not interpret that word induction as if to mean all qualitative research would develop new theories. No. You're not going to change the world. But the qualitative research, each one of them, would contribute to our understanding of that theoretical perspective, would provide new elements to it. And then people like us would come in as quantitative researchers, would say, let's operationalize those variables and let's attempt to test it. So I think to me now, the stage we are in any discipline, I would like personally to see, I may be biased, I'm always biased toward theory. I would like to see a qualitative research guided by an overall theoretical perspective, even though loosely. Okay, that's what qualitative researchers do, and that's the beauty of the subjective methods, guys. Okay, people call the qualitative research des bricoleurs because they bring together different concepts to tell you a story that you will never ever find in quantitative research. I'll give you a good example, and probably if you allow me. I teach research methods, and I do qualitative research as part of the course. And when I do qualitative research, I actually do a qualitative interview in class. So the question I asked my MBA finance student, I picked one of them and I say, you know, what motivates you to do an MBA? He said, Robin, I wanted to wear a hat. I said, what? That's what the qualitative researcher does. What's my next question? Why? Tell me more about it. He said, Robin, I'm a mature student. I don't have an undergraduate degree. I've been recruited based on my experience, and that had a symbolic meaning to me. Would I have been able to capture that as a quantitative researcher? No matter what theoretical perspective I would have used, I would have never been able to capture that as a qualitative researcher, as a quantitative researcher. So now your qualitative research would be formed by probably theories of study motivation, whatever it is. You add a new dimension to it. Okay. Of course, then that new dimension contribute to our theoretical understanding of that phenomenon.
May I once again confirm if there are any more questions for Professor Robin?
Yes.
I mean, in your conclusion, you mentioned that strong research, requires strong theorization, right? So since you are biased, how do you define or determine strong theorization?
Whatever you're doing should make sense. Okay, I'm not too sure whether I'm biased toward theory, but I think all of you now, unless you can make sense of Nicolas Cage, that doesn't depend on bias, that's logic. Okay, so the only way that you can prove logic in your result is to have a certain theoretical perspective. I'm biased in the sense that I like to see that strong theory coming out, but that's me as an individual. Other researchers can still love theory, but they are softer. But I can guarantee you, no one will accept Nicolas Cage, if you understand what I mean.
Thank you. So may I once again confirm if there are any more questions from the floor? No more questions? All right. Prof. Robin, may I invite you to the right side of the room? I'd like to invite Prof. Mustafa to present the token of appreciation to Prof. Robin.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you once again, Prof. Robin, and thank you, Prof. Mustafa. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of PGRC Day 1. These workshops have offered valuable insights into various aspects of research. We have enabled us to dissect and analyze written content effectively, understand how research instruments are used as powerful tools in collecting data, and delve into the intricacies of theory and methodology. As research students, we have learned a great deal, and I'm confident that these workshops have equipped everyone here with valuable tools and fresh perspective that will greatly influence our future research endeavors. Before we dismiss, I would like to remind all that we will be having continuing PGRC tomorrow with research paper presentations. Please take note of the sessions that you will be either chairing or presenting carefully. And please join the particular sessions or breakout rooms 10 minutes before the starting time. Until we meet again virtually tomorrow, safe travels to those who are here with us today in person. And to our online participants, thank you for your engagement and commitment to this event. Goodbye.